Good evening, everyone. My name is Violet Yan, and I will be one of your hosts for tonight.
My name is Hank Shi, and I will be your other host for tonight.
We are a part of the program BranchOut. BranchOut is a nonprofit program with Veritas Education Leaders that was co-founded by Dr. Yushin Wu and Mr. Richard Wang in 2015. The organization has grown from 20 student volunteers to over 100 student volunteers yearly. Our high school student mentors come from over 50 different schools across 6 states.
We started out as a pure STEM mentoring program working at the community centers, homeless shelters, and county summer credit recovery programs, and have expanded into a community outreach program to promote cross-cultural understanding by featuring community heroes, creating research articles, and organizing community workshops. As an award-winning community engagement program, we have received endorsement from the U.S. Congress, including those from Senators Tim Kaine and Andy Kim. Our innovator program, focused on computer science and web development, has also won the U.S. Congressional App Challenge. Additionally, BranchOut was honored with the Gold Star Group Volunteer Award from the Fairfax Neighborhood and Community Services Organization. It is hard to believe the BranchOut organization just celebrated its 10th anniversary last year. Here's a clip about BranchOut.
BranchOut is an award-winning youth leadership program founded in 2015. BranchOut has many chapters in major U.S. cities. For more than a decade, BranchOut has connected through actions. BranchOut not only promotes STEM education, but also cross-cultural understanding and civic engagement. Multiple volunteering initiatives developing social skills. Meeting Massachusetts State Auditor Diana DiZoglio at State House. Trash pickup at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Visit to a science lab at Harvard University. BranchOut focuses on building resilience, hope, and community, one story at a time. Empowering individuals to share their journeys. Empower, inspire, grow. Every year, 200 youth participate in the program and have helped over 1,000 students in various communities.
I just want to say thank you to BranchOut for everything that you're doing to be able to help support students, helps be able to support young people in our community, especially those in underserved communities.
I want to thank BranchOut for the opportunity to be part of this special celebration. I commend the BranchOut team and your more than 170 volunteer mentors on
BranchOut and make a difference. BranchOut offers several awards, including the Presidential Volunteer Service Award, Congressional Award for Youth Leadership, Congressional Award for STEM Education, Congressional Award for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, Congressional Award for Humanity and Arts, and Congressional Award for Environmental, Social, and Governance. Scan the QR code and reach out today.
As part of BranchOut's goals to promote civic engagement, community, and STEM education, we're extremely glad to have you with us today. The psychology of student athletes, including how they think, perform, and sustain their well-being, has always been a vital part of the high school experience. Tonight, we are honored to welcome two distinguished panelists whose expertise in sports psychology, mental performance, and athlete well-being will guide us through this topic with a real-world perspective on the true student-athlete experience.
Our first panelist is Dr. Keith Kaufman, a licensed psychologist and certified mental performance consultant with extensive training in both clinical and sports psychology. He earned his BA in psychology and exercise and sports science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and completed his PhD in clinical psychology at Catholic University, followed by specialized sports psychology training during his predoctoral internship at Virginia Tech. Dr. Kaufman has taught sports psychology, co-directed a university research lab, and is the co-developer of Mindful Sport Performance Enhancement, or MSPE, an evidence-based mental training program for athletes and coaches. He has worked with collegiate and professional athletes, contributed to major sports psychology organizations, and continues to advance applied mental skills training through the MSPE Institute and his consulting work.
Our second panelist is Mr. Kyle Cabotaje, a certified mental performance consultant through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology with a passion for helping others reach their highest potential. As a competitive swimmer for 15 years and a youth swim coach for 5 years, Mr. Cabotaje experienced the mental challenges that arise during high-level competition and recognized the need for mental performance in athletics. He received his master's degree in sports and performance psychology from the California Baptist University and has spent the last 3 years working with a wide range of teams, athletes, and performers to develop mental skills such as confidence, resilience, and emotional self-regulation. He is currently the owner of I.M.P.A.C.T Performance and is striving to introduce mental performance to all levels of athletics.
We were originally supposed to have a third panelist, Dr. Brian Yu. However, due to unforeseen circumstances, Dr. Yu will not be joining us today. I'm sure you both will provide excellent information regarding the industry for all of us, and we wanted to thank you for being here. Each question we ask tonight will relate to a different aspect of the student-athlete well-being framework, which highlights the many interconnected factors that influence an athlete's overall well-being. This framework is organized into 4 key dimensions: physical well-being, cognitive well-being, psychological well-being, and social well-being, which can be viewed on the slide, viewed here on the slide.
Rather than looking at these areas by themselves, this framework emphasizes how they work together. For example, academic stress can affect confidence in competition, and an injury can impact one's mental health significantly. By understanding these connections, we can better support student athletes as whole people, not just competitors. As we ask our questions, if any of our panelists have any thoughts, feel free to unmute and share them. To our audience, feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat and they will be answered during the Q&A portion. We plan to end the webinar by 8 p.m. today, so be sure to ask your questions in the chat box so we can get to them before the meeting ends. The first question we have for you today is concerning the physical well-being dimension of the framework. How do professionals like yourselves help athletes regain confidence after an injury?
Do you have an order? Do you like to go?
Yeah.
If you want to go first, Kyle, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Well, again, I just want to say specifically, thank you for having me. Love all that you guys are doing, and love to be able to share my passion to all of you. And thank you to Dr. Kaufman as well. I'm looking forward to hearing from you and learning from you as well. But the big thing with this question, what I see, I've worked a lot with some injured athletes, and when we talk about confidence, what I tend to find is there's a little bit of a bridge between how people define confidence and where they get their confidence from. So, confidence, most people I think would define it as believing in yourself and believing you're capable of doing something, right? But then their confidence then comes from certain outcomes, the things that they see themselves doing or believe that are capable of happening, right? The difference is outcomes are almost always uncontrollable, right? We can't control what the outcome will be. So if we base our confidence in a certain outcome, then our confidence is going to be a little less, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not going to be as strong because sometimes we might have it based on an outcome we get, or if an outcome that happens that's outside of our control, confidence might be a little shakier. So when it comes to injury, what I tend to work on with these athletes is what are these things that are within your control, right? So that's the effort that you're putting into your recovery. Are you seeing progress, right? That's a big one because a lot of times people are expecting to get 100% better once they recover. Rather, we want them to focus on what are some small achievable goals that you can set for yourself that will push you, but also are going to be things that will allow you to slowly make progress rather than making big leaps. And when we set our sights on big leaps, we often disappoint ourselves, and that can affect confidence. So I try to make it more so be small, achievable goals, so that way they can gain more confidence within themselves when they see that progress.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, I certainly agree. Control is a big part of this. I think that a really good parallel here, and how I often work with people who are coming off of injuries, is that just like anytime something happens to us, if you have a fight with a friend, you're going to be a little bit sensitive the next time you see that friend. And it takes a little bit of time to find comfort again, right? To feel safe with that friend, to start to retrust that friend after whatever the breach is that happened between you. And the same kind of thing can happen with your body. A lot of athletes experience injury as a betrayal. They experience it as a grief reaction. They can be really angry. They can be really sad. they can have a difficult time trusting their body as they're trying to work their way back. And so, as a psychologist, right? I mean, the question is really broad. How do professionals help? So obviously, lots of injured athletes have a whole team of people who are working with them as they try to get back on the field. But from a psychological standpoint, a lot of times what we're trying to do is help them uh, recover a sense of safety and kind of give them the permission to feel scared. Of course, they're going to feel scared. Of course, they're going to feel nervous, uncertain. They're going to want to have more control than maybe they can, as Kyle suggested. And so, kind of helping them to rebuild that trust and see it as a process and not have expectations that end up creating more difficulties, like more anxiety, more pressure, that somehow they're not supposed to be feeling the things that would be perfectly natural for anybody who's coming back from an injury. So I think confidence you can very much think of as an outcome, but it takes a little while to get back there, and so we're helping with that process.
Thank you guys for that amazing insight. I loved Mr. Cabotaje, how you spoke about finding the small achievable goals as a baseball player. Sometimes, in-game outcomes can be very random, and so it's just finding that like silver lining. Maybe you're in a slump. Finding that silver lining is always great for me personally. And Dr. Kaufman, I loved how you touched on how injury is sort of seen as a betrayal sometimes. Personally, I've fractured my growth plate pitching before, so at the time, I really saw injury as a betrayal. I do have a follow-up question though. Well, what's like the step-by-step process to help an athlete recover from like an injury or like mentally? Because I know when I first fractured my elbow, it was really hard to get back and start throwing a ball. So what is like what are the stepping stones to get back to where you were previously?
I mean, in all honesty, I wouldn't say there's a step-by-step process exactly. It very much depends on the athlete. It depends on the severity of the injury. A lot of times, if an injury was unexpected, right? If they were out for a season for a really long time, it can look very different than if someone's coming back after just missing a few games. So I think there's a lot of nuance. A great question, but I think there's a lot of nuance to the question. I think, from at least where I work from, I would say the steps are, and you said in reading my bio, I do a lot of work in mindfulness, which is very much about accepting things as they are, right? So often the stress, the anxiety that we feel in and out of sport is because we want things to be different than what they are. I don't like that this happened to my body, right? I'm sure you didn't like that you fractured your growth plate. That's awful. And so, we have to find a way to be, okay, this is a thing. This happened to me. And once we can accept that this thing has happened to us, then we have a choice, right? Do we want to proceed with the activity or do we want to step back and not? Well, I think where athletes who are coming back get into danger is where they try to protect themselves while they're also trying to engage in the activity. And there's always going to be a level of risk involved in sport. And so I think the step-by-step process is really helping the athlete to accept what happened and then to retake ownership of that risk, which might feel a lot scarier now that they've been hurt. It's not like the risk wasn't there before, but now that we've been injured, we've been burned once by it, it just feels like a bigger threat to us. So helping the athlete to kind of accept that threat, accept the emotions that are going to be there, the thoughts that are going to be there naturally in a situation like that, and to start to develop that comfort again, like I was saying before. And one of the coolest things about the human brain is that it does kind of forget over time. Once we start to feel safe again, once we start to feel comfortable, it doesn't feel quite as strong. It doesn't feel quite as scary. We don't think about the injury quite as much. And so we're kind of building that bridge, letting the athlete work through the inevitable feelings they're going to have as they're getting back, knowing that it's not going to feel like this forever. They are going to recover that sense of comfort again.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So that, not a whole lot to add to that. I would just say from my own personal experience, like again, there is completely every injury is different, every person's different, they're going to react to it. So I would say pretty much probably any topic covered in the area of sport and performance psychology, we could probably answer that as well. Like there's no one way to solve these things because everyone's going to be different. But so to that extent, it's sometimes difficult to give a specific answer to that. But I think one of like the big things that I think Dr. Kaufman was talking about as well is just being able to accept that the injury happened, but also being able to separate yourself from the injury in the sense of I am injured, but that does not like change who I am as a person, right? Because I can relate to that when I very much internalized it and kind of identified in my injuries rather than seeing myself as a competitive swimmer. I saw myself as a less than because this happened to me, right? So it is being able to say, yes, it did happen, but that doesn't need to like take away from my value. So that's, I think, a big thing in the initial stages that I have to work on a lot with individuals. But everything else, yeah, I really love what Dr. Kaufman had to say about that.
Thank you guys for those great points once again. I think you guys are definitely right. Coming to terms with the injury was probably the hardest part in my process as well. So now we're going to move on to our next set of questions, which is regarding the cognitive well-being dimension of the framework. How can athletes recover mentally after making a mistake during a game?
Oh yeah, this one you get a lot of. There's a few different ways usually, or kind of like two different necessarily, uh, not necessarily approaches, but ways that it needs to be addressed. I feel a lot of times people are hoping like, okay, what can I do right there and then when I make a mistake? And that's usually what they're hoping for. And for that, I usually just say we need to find some way to be able to stop that spiral, right? Because a lot of times when we make a mistake, we get in our head, we start replaying it over and over again. And then the longer that happens, the more the mistake kind of grows and it becomes more of our focal point, right? So the first thing in the moment, what I would do to work on them is have them create some sort of cues for themselves to be able to bring themselves back to the present, right? Because yes, the mistake happened, but that's in the past, right? We can't control that anymore. So what are some things that you can do to be able to bring yourself back to the present moment, whether that be taking a few deep breaths, feeling the sensations in your body, doing some sort of physical cue, like a lot of people like to do a clap or whatever, whether it's a specific word that refocuses them, right? Doing that to be able to bring them in the present moment. Now, the second thing I would really probably do is this is going to be more of a time not during a game. It would be in a discussion after practice for them to then be able to utilize in their own performance, is recognize what mistakes really are, right? A lot of times people can catastrophize mistakes, seeing them as the reason why they lose a game or the end of the world, right? When we take a step back and remove the emotion from it, what we tend to find is it was just one little moment in a massive point in time where this outcome wasn't what we wanted, right? So when we're able to perceive it that way, we can kind of remove the threat a little bit from it, learn from it, and then be able to then say, okay, now that I'm starting to train myself to see mistakes in a different way, how can I then be able to move on from it? So the question would be, what would be most important to do in that moment rather than focusing on it, which would be focusing on what can be controlled. By the way, you're going to hear me probably talk a lot about things that are out of control or in control throughout this because it's a lot of what I tend to work on with athletes. So I apologize if it gets repetitive, but it's really just more so understanding that mistakes are often exaggerated in our heads. So it's learning to really recognize them from what they are by taking the emotion out and then having a more task-oriented approach afterwards.
And Kylie, you never have to apologize for that because that's 90% of what we do, right? I mean, control is such a big part of the psychological battle in sports because we want it and it's hard to find. So I will just sort of share a bit of how I think about this, which I think is going to echo some of what Kyle said. But I think psychologically, we can make a distinction between reactions and responses. And it kind of, if we're just talking to someone on the street, it's like reactions, responses, it's the same thing, right? Where it's two synonyms. But in psychology, they actually are very, very different. So reactions are our thoughts and our emotions when something happens. And they're automatic. We don't get to pick and choose what our reactions are. If I am a soccer player and I miss a penalty shot, I'm going to have a reaction to that. I don't get to pick and choose what that reaction is. It's probably not going to be a positive reaction, right? It just, something happens, we react to it. Our responses, though, those are our behaviors. What do we do in response to the reactions that we have? And I think what Kyle was speaking to and what happens all the time when we make mistakes is that our reactions hijack our responses. So reactions aren't controllable, responses are, or at least we can influence the situation if we can't control our responses. And so when we kind of allow a reaction to completely occupy our brain, a lot of times we give up the precious little control that we have as an athlete. And one of my favorite quotes, I reference this all the time with clients. This was from a former NFL player who had a nightmare first half in his first ever playoff game. Fumbled the ball 3 times in the first half, was directly responsible for his team being way down. And he came out the second half and was unbelievable and was instrumental to the team coming back and actually winning the game from a huge deficit. And as you might imagine, the reporters were all around him at the end of the game, like, "Oh my gosh, how did you do that? You had this nightmare." He was a rookie, by the way, too. So this was like his first ever experience. You had this nightmare experience, and then you come out in the second half. How did you do that? And he just looked at the cameras and he said, "It happened. It sucked. Got to move on." And I love that, right? Because so often as an athlete, we just want to move on. And the more we try to just force ourselves to move on, we're oftentimes giving in to our reactions, right? We have to kind of do those first 2 steps first. We have to acknowledge it. It happened, right? We can notice what our reaction is. It sucks. I don't like this. I don't like that I fumbled the ball 3 times in the first half. But I still have a job to do in the second half. There's still more game to play. And so being able to acknowledge, being able to allow for the reaction, and then being able to make a choice in our response, right? That is the skill set. If I had to boil that down into a 3-step process, that would be it for me: is acknowledge, make space for, right? Accept that this is what's here, and then make a choice in how you proceed.
Thank you guys for such great insights. But I can't shake the curiosity. Who is this NFL player that you're talking about?
He actually, at the time he was playing for the Green Bay Packers, he actually played for the Commanders for a little bit toward the end of his career. He's a guy named Ryan Grant. He was a running back. He was pretty decent for a few years. So I think he probably retired about 10 years ago by now. So it's been a bit.
Do you know what year this game
When he said
happened?
that, it was maybe like 2006, 2007, somewhere around there. So it's been a bit, but there were just for years I had that newspaper quote like stuck up on my office wall just because it's like that's what we're trying to train, right? It happened, it sucked, got to move on.
Well, thank you. Violet, you can take it away now.
Yeah, thank you, Hank. I really liked how both of you guys mentioned how sometimes in the moment when you make those mistakes, sort of your brain starts spiraling and losing control. And I was wondering because I personally am a figure skater, so when we do our routine, unlike some other sports, we don't get the time to like pause, take a deep breath, and sort of reset. What sort of advice would you give to athletes who are within these situations and like in their head, they start spiraling while they're in the middle of their routine?
So great question. And what I would say is, in part, what we do in sports psychology, it is mental training, just like we train our bodies physically. So the short answer to your question is, if you haven't trained mentally, if you haven't worked with someone like us, if you haven't ever done, for example, attentional practices, then trying to do that in the middle of a performance is darn near impossible, right? It's so hard to manage your own mind when you're under a pressure situation. So to kind of walk it back and say, well, how would I work with an athlete to train them so that when they get into a moment like that, it kind of ties back to what I was saying a moment ago. Like, you notice those reactions, like, wow, I'm really nervous right now, or wow, I really don't like the way the first part of this program went, or wow, I know that move that I'm really nervous about is upcoming. And it's so easy for our mind to get pulled to the future or to dwell in the past. And when we do that, we weaken our ability to execute in the present. And it is that execution in the present, that's where we have our control, or at least our influence. And that's where we can be really impactful as an athlete. So the mind is not, it's like a boat on water, right? It's going to float, it's going to move, right? And so we want to be able to give it anchors. We want to give it places where when we notice it's drifting off, we want to be able to pull it back because it's going to drift off, right? No one has 100% attention throughout an entire performance. It's almost impossible for us to have attention, honestly, for more than just a couple of seconds at a time, right? So getting practices at bringing our attention back, right? When I find myself getting nervous, how do I tune back into the present moment? And so I will develop very specific present moment anchors with athletes that we prepare for because we know those moments are going to happen. So as Kyle mentioned earlier, that might be the breath. The breath is a wonderful present moment anchor. It might be a different sense. It might be, something that I'm touching or feeling right now. It might be a visual cue. I mentioned another football player, someone who recently retired, a little bit, I date myself a little bit less, Russell Wilson. One of his big routines going into visiting stadiums is he would always pick out a spot and say, okay, that's going to be my anchor point. So when things get crazy, I'm having to lead a 2-minute drive at the end of a game to try to win it, right? I'm going to be able to focus my attention to that spot. That's going to center me. That's going to ground me, bring me back to where I need to be so I don't get wrapped up in the pressure of the moment. And so that's the kind of thing we want to prepare for and train in advance so that we can use that when we get into those really chaotic situations.
Yeah, what I'll just briefly add is I work with a lot of collegiate dancers, so it's very much not the same, but very similarities in terms of when you're out there in performance, you mess up, you just have to keep going through it, right? But it does get in their head a lot. So one thing that I've kind of just really worked on them is, everyone in athletics, I think I would hope one of their goals is to win, right? One of the things I like to do is use acronyms. So I take win and then we just say what's important now, right? So WIN, what's important now. So most likely you're probably going to have that in your mind throughout this when you're performing, right? So when you have that, you can just remember, okay, what's important now? Just as Dr. Kaufman was saying, we often go into the future, we go into the past, right? That's a big thing. A lot of times the dancers tend to see is they're looking at this one point of the routine that they get really tired on, and it's really difficult. But then what they're doing in the routine currently suffers because their attention isn't there, right? But when they're constantly able to train themselves to be what's important right now, what can I do? It becomes more of a thing. So I definitely agree that it is going to be something that is more of a practice, something that you have to develop through practice, not when it happens in a actual moment, because when it happens in the moment, if you haven't practiced, just like you wouldn't want to go compete figure skating without practicing, right? You also wouldn't want to expect yourself to be able to do these mental skills without practicing them as well. So what I always tell my dancers is go out to practice, go make as many mistakes as you can, and then learn to be able to stay present from them.
Thank you for that insight. I really liked how you guys both were emphasizing on trying to stay focused in the present instead of dwelling in the past or the future. So the next question that I want to dig into is what happens in the brain when someone experiences performance anxiety?
I was like, you probably have a little bit more of the specifics down for me.
Oh, okay.
I'll
I'm
let
happy
you.
to go. We had a little rotation going, so
Yeah, I
that's why I
know.
was trying to, but I'm happy to go if you
Okay,
prefer me to.
yeah.
That's cool. Um, well, performance anxiety or any kind of anxiety, it's a complete body experience. So it's not just the mind, right? So actually what I explain to athletes a lot is you can kind of put anxiety into two big buckets. There's what's called cognitive anxiety, which is what's happening in the brain. And then there's what's called somatic anxiety, which is happening in the body. And real quick, because this isn't what you're asking about, somatic anxiety is essentially our fight or flight reaction, fight, flight, or freeze, right? So our heart starts racing, our breathing speeds up, it gets shallow, our digestion slows down, we start to sweat, our palms can get clammy, our fingers get cold, right? All of those things happen in our bodies when we experience performance anxiety. What happens cognitively in our brains, without getting too technical in terms of all the different parts that are actually involved in it, basically the mind jumps to the future, right? That is what anxiety is all about. That we sense some kind of danger coming down the pike, and our brain jumps to the future and tries to offset it in some way. And that's what can be so damaging about performance anxiety to successful execution is, as I was saying earlier, if you're not thinking about what you're doing, you're thinking about all the what ifs, right? What if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? What if I don't do this? What if I do this? What if the ref makes a bad call? What if my teammate doesn't pass me the ball? All the possible what ifs that take you away from what you're doing, and your execution goes down. So the biggest sort of mental cognitive impact of performance anxiety is attention. It pulls your attention to the future. And if you put those two things together, the somatic anxiety and the cognitive anxiety, it throws off your attention and your coordination. So Hank, you mentioned you were a baseball pitcher, right? And so first, it's important to say we all have a little bit of performance anxiety. Performance anxiety is normal. And actually performance anxiety, when it's not seen as a threat, can actually help our performance, right? Like, oh, I have this arousal, I have these symptoms because I care, because I'm excited to compete, because I don't know what's going to happen next, right? That's kind of the beauty of sport. That's what we love about sport is the excitement. If we knew what was going to happen, if we knew if we'd be successful or not, it wouldn't be very exciting, right? So if we can recognize those symptoms as, sometimes the cliche is pressure is a privilege, right? Like we can lean into it as, okay, this just means I'm ready to compete, then it can actually help us. But if it takes hold and your attention gets pulled to the future and your body experiences all these changes and sort of tenses up, then it throws off our coordination, it throws off our attention, and we're just not able to execute, right? There's no way you can throw an effective pitch if your coordination is off and your attention is not on your target. So yeah, Kyle, curious what you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would say completely agree. And what I would tend to see a lot of with it and believe happens kind of going into the coordination aspect is we begin to freak out about so a lot of times anxiety becomes from those things like who you're playing against, the potential stakes that might be about getting eliminated, right? So we tend to view our actions as we need to be different to be able to make it to that standard, right? So we essentially see it as a threat, and it's more of like, okay, to be able to accomplish this, we have to be different, right? So, well, comes a lot of your automatic skills often become a little bit, you have to be a little bit, you tend to make yourself a little bit more intentional about them, saying like, to get this outcome, I need to make this pitch completely perfect, right? Like paint the corner, whatever it might be, right? Compared to just, you know what, I'm just going to trust my stuff and know that I'm going to put the best out there, right? So it goes a lot from trust turning into expecting perfection, which every single person on here knows perfection is not going to happen 99% of the time, right? So what I think tends to happen is we slow ourselves down, changing our approach to try to achieve that perfection. But when we change the process that we've done to get us to that position, we're not going to be the same person, right? So to me, it's always just about recognizing, like, okay, what do you see as a threat? And then once we establish that, it's okay, what needs to be different, right? And through a little bit of discussion, they realize, you know what? I don't actually have to be different. It's more about recognizing like I belong in this situation. It is like Dr. Kaufman said, I'm excited to be here. I just need to be the best version of myself right now. I don't need to do anything differently. It's what can I do in this moment?
All right, thank you guys for those awesome points. Dr. Kaufman, I actually used to be a pitcher, right? But then I fractured my elbow, and then I actually transitioned to becoming a catcher. And one of the things that I love about being a catcher is I have so much to worry about that there's nothing in the future that I can like think about. There's no really like what ifs, like what if this happens, what if this happens? Because I'm already thinking about the present so much. So I love that you touched on that. And Mr. Kabotaje, I love that you talked about like basically like a stadium pulse or like when you're in a playoff game, you think about like your opponents as something more than they might be. And really just trusting your stuff is exactly what I think a lot of players need. So now let's move on to the next question. What is one simple strategy student athletes can start using today?
I'll just say real quick. I mean, to me, the greatest weapon that anyone has in managing the mental game of whatever sport is they play is working on their attention. So I think mental practices, whether it's meditation, whether it's visualization, that help you to focus, to hone those skills. Like I was saying a moment ago, trying to be aware and accepting of whatever you find. The beautiful thing is like, it's not just when we're in sports that we're experiencing thoughts and emotions. We're constantly, anytime we tune in, sitting here right now, if you take just a moment and tune into what you're thinking and feeling, there's something there. And you can practice noticing what's there, welcoming it in, like, okay, interesting, I'm hungry, or interesting, I'm full, right? Whatever it is you might be feeling. And then, like I said before, make a choice about how do I want to proceed? Do I want to go get a snack? Do I want to sit here and continue to listen? So I think practices that help you come into the present moment, notice what's there, and then very intentionally, Kyle used this word earlier, right? Being very intentional about what you do next. That is something that you can practice very informally. You don't need to work with a sports psychologist to do that. And the cool thing about this, and there's all kinds of neuroscience that looks at this, when you do practices like this, your brain changes, you get better, you strengthen your brain, just like you strengthen other parts of your body, right? The parts that are managing attention, they get thicker, they get stronger, they get better. We can lock in more, we can lock in longer, we can recover our attention more easily, as Viola was asking about before. But it's something we've got to practice, and we have to practice quite often if we're going to see actual improvement.
I'm glad you brought up attention because that was one I was considering. I was like, if you don't bring it up, I probably would. But I think the other one, so that one kind of, as you were talking about earlier, talked a lot about how the somatic versus cognitive. Mine can honestly be used for the somatic aspects, and that is just essentially being more intentional about taking intentional breaths, right? Every single one of us right now, we are breathing. We do it all day long. We rarely ever think about it, right? But there is so much power in how we can use our breath and how that can affect us. So whenever I find myself being stressed, worried about something, that's just my initial go-to thing. Just let me take a deep breath and make sure I feel it all the way in my stomach. A lot of times what we tend to notice, or I tend to notice in athletes who are getting nervous, stressed, whatever it might be, it's either they hold their breath or their breathing becomes very shallow. And I call it shoulder breathing because you kind of see it more in their chest and shoulder area. When you're able to really take a nice deep breath, getting it all through your stomach, it helps you to be able to be aware how your body's feeling. And then you can even do certain things like just making your exhale a little bit longer, which can actually help decrease that heart rate, decrease that threat response a little bit, and help yourself feel a little bit more calm. So to me, I would recommend everyone just taking some time throughout their day and taking some intentional breathing exercises.
Thank you guys for that insight. I really like how you guys both covered different areas, how Dr. Kaufman was focusing on working on attention, and how Mr. Cabotaje was focusing about being intentional with your breaths. So now our next set of questions is going to be concerning the psychological well-being dimension of the framework. Why do so many athletes tie their identity to their sport?
I mean, that one is, again, we could talk a long time about that. I think one thing is that people are very passionate about sports for a variety of reasons. It is something that we're very commonly exposed to from a young age. And anytime that we're told we're good at something or we experience rewards for being good at something, as human beings, we tend to want more of that. And so I think, when we recognize like, oh, I'm actually pretty good at baseball, I'm going to keep playing baseball. It very easily becomes something that's important to us and something that can start to define us. I think in a lot of ways too, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the influence of parents and adults that they have on youth athletes. And for the better and for worse, right? That so many people's gateway into sports is because their parents signed them up or because their parents like those sports. And, as kids, we might become the fans of the same teams as what our parents followed. And so I think there's a lot of identification there, where, as younger athletes, as adolescents, a lot of times we want approval. We want approval from the adults in our lives. We want our parents to approve of us. We want our coaches, our teachers, our psychologists, even, or, certainly our friends. And so, one of the ways that we're evaluated, or that we might make ourselves pleasing, is through athletic performance. And so going back to something that was asked about earlier, that's part of why it can be so devastating when it's taken away through something like injury, right? If you're used to getting accolades, if you're used to being known for a certain thing, or being rewarded for a certain thing, and that gets taken away from you, it can be devastating for some people. It can be really, really hard to move on and figure out, well, what now? What next? And it's just like any other part of identity. It evolves. I've consulted with Major League Baseball teams and players who, have talked extensively about how difficult it is to retire and how devastating it is, because this is just what they've done since they were 6 years old or 5 years old. They've played baseball and maybe they've made it to the highest level. And now that they're 30 or 40, they don't know what to do with themselves because it requires such a commitment, so much time to participate in sports, right? So much of yourself that you give And when it ends, it can be absolutely devastating for some people.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would, my first thought when thinking about this question was just the validation of it, right? We enjoy the rewards that come from it. I was a competitive swimmer for 15 years. Whenever someone asked me why I swam, pretty much the honest answer was because I sucked at everything else. I was no good at a sport with any ball or anything like that, and I just was able to figure out swimming. So I was more drawn to swimming because I was able to do that. And what I always notice and tell people is you're going to feel what you focus on. So when you're able to focus on that, the success that you do, it's going to become more a part of you because you're experiencing that. So I would just to kind of just piggyback off of it. I think a lot of it is just because of how exposed we are to it and how much time and energy is given to it that it's almost hard not to identify yourself with it. And I would say that there is nothing wrong with having that athletic identity. It's just, is that your only identity? Are you able to separate the athlete from the student, the family member, things like that? When there is no real separation, that's when the issues really start to show up.
I think that's a really important point, just to mention real quick, because Kyle brought it up. I think balance is one of the most important parts, especially in being a student athlete. I guess it's a little bit different if you're doing it for a living, full time, you kind of understand. But as a student athlete, there are so many things that are pulling for your attention. There's so many obligations, responsibilities that we have, so many different pillars of our identity. And if one, whether it's sports or anything else, if one piece of our identity gets outsized and takes over, that's where it can become a problem. And so some of the work that we do sometimes with clients, they might have a really healthy, robust athletic identity, but if it's too strong, then, sometimes we have to help find balance. I joke with clients all the time. I go through, when I meet with someone the first time, I ask them a whole bunch of questions. And, you ask them about their sport, you ask them about their life, they're ready for everything. The one question that tends to throw people the most, and look at me like I have two heads, is when I say, besides your sport, what else do you do for fun? What do you like? People are like, it's almost like that's the one that stops them. They can talk about their sexual orientation, no problem. The stuff that you expect is like very personal, very private, really hard to talk about, no problem. But what do you do for fun? What are your hobbies and interests outside of sport? That's the one that floors them.
All right, thank you guys for those amazing points. Uh, Personally, like I've been trying to get recruited by colleges and play college baseball, so that's a big time commitment. And I've been trying to balance like school, sports, and then also like trying to find my own identity, like you're saying, like balancing both my sport, but also finding like other things that I like to do for fun. And I think the points that you guys brought up were really important, and also I think that I agree with them wholeheartedly. Okay, so now we will open up the panel for any questions from the viewers. Feel free to type your questions in the chat. Also, since Dr. Kaufman has to leave at 8 p.m. today, we will invite our panelists to stay for a few minutes for a group picture while people type their questions in the chat. All right, so the first question I see here is there any advice you'd give to athletes struggling with motivation after a period of burnout?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge topic. Perhaps again, especially with student athletes. Um, this is relatively new that we're playing sports essentially year round. If we want to be competitive, right? If you're serious about a sport, you're almost certainly playing multiple seasons. Violet, you mentioned skating. There are sports like that where kids are getting involved younger and younger and younger. And, if you're not getting to certain levels by a certain age, which is way younger than maybe it should be, then it's hard to advance in the sport. So there are unbelievable pressures and the longevity of careers, how long people are competing almost continuously, is really unprecedented in terms of where youth and adolescent sport has gone. And so burnout, um, it's a thing. It's something that's incredibly common. You can understand burnout as a stress-driven phenomenon, right? It's too much stress with too little recovery. So when Kyle was talking earlier about, a really useful tool is managing your breath. That's a really good relaxation technique. If you breathe properly, you trigger what's called your parasympathetic nervous system. You release a little bit of tension, right? When you can blow off a little bit of stress, or if you have a hobby and interest outside of your sport, or if you want to play a different sport than your primary ones, these are all ways that you can protect yourself and insulate yourself, because too much chronic stress over time, what it basically does is eat your motivation. And so if it gets bad enough, what you honestly need is recovery. So if you are actually pretty far along in the burnout cycle, and there's a process. So a lot of times athletes will start first by feeling kind of stale and kind of blah about their sport. I don't want to go, and just kind of flat. And then maybe that would progress into something where things start to break down. Maybe they start to get sick. Maybe their performance starts to drop off pretty significantly. And by the time you get to actual burnout, it's actually a state of exhaustion. And at that point, if you're burnt out, you need to take time away from your sport. That's the only way to recover your motivation. But if you're at those earlier stages, it really is a matter of rebalancing your stress load with your recovery. So it might mean taking a couple of days off. It might mean mixing in some other activities. It might mean changing your sleep routine, or even like, don't want to say like studying less, but seeing what you can cut back on a little bit to try to lessen the amount of effort, the amount of hours that you're putting in that are taxing on your body and on your mind. It's hard. It's really, really hard, because the demands are just way, way higher than what we allow ourselves to recover, and that's a problem.
Yeah, kind of to piggyback off of that, the main thing when I work with individuals experiencing that is what I have them do is I have them look at what are like the top 5 things that you're spending your time on. And then right next to that list, I have them, what are your top 5 values in life? And honestly, a lot of times athletes struggle to even get 3 values because student athletes especially, they probably think school and sport. That's really all they think about. But when you really start to think about what do I actually value in life, a lot of times what student athletes are going to notice is those 2 lists are very, very different. You're a lot of times spending your time on the things that maybe you don't value as much in your life, right? So to kind of give some specifics of like what are some things that you can do to maybe take a step away from it. Like I'm sure a lot of us do value our sports, but kind of like we talked about earlier, there are other aspects of life as well and a lot of things that we value. So if you're like, what can I do maybe to recover? Think, what are some things that you value in your life? What are some things maybe you're not spending enough time on that you think would be good for you? And then really kind of develop yourself into that so that way you can get some of that recovery, and that maybe when you take a little bit step away, you can kind of reignite the passion of like, man, I do value this in my sport and I do want to focus more on that, because I think sometimes we do value the sport, but it does kind of value more the outcome rather than the reason you actually joined in the first place, which is, for the cliche, the love of the actual game, right? So
All right, guys, thank you for those points. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for a Q&A today, but we have one last question for the panelists today. That is a general takeaway question and encompasses all dimensions of the framework.
If every athlete could leave today remembering one thing, what would you want it to be?
I'll go
I see.
into, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. It's kind of a combination of both something that I and Dr. Kaufman talked about, but it's going to be there's always going to be situations we don't like to be in. You can't control the situation, but you're going to be able to control your response to it. If you can focus on doing that, focusing on what you're going to do next, that's the best thing you can do. So really just focus on what's controllable and then go on your way.
So something that I've written a lot about and talked a lot about is what I call the mental training paradox, that we just spend vastly, vastly larger amounts of time training our bodies than we do training our minds. And yet we kind of universally agree that the mind is important. And so there's that disparity there. And so I guess something I hope you take out of this from what both of us have been saying is that there are very specific, in many cases, not particularly taxing ways that you can practice, that you can train your mind, that will have very real impacts on both your success and also your enjoyment within your sports. So don't take your mind for granted, right? If you go out and run a bunch of laps, that's not training your mind. That might be training your body. You're getting in better shape. That's great. And that's important. I'm not saying don't train physically, but I would encourage everybody to make a little bit of time and space to do some specific mental exercises and see how that makes you feel. See if it makes you feel better. See if it makes you play better. So just don't take the mind for granted would be my big message.
Thank you for those insights. I was wondering if you guys would like to pick one of the questions from the chat each, like one of you guys chooses one question and another chooses another question to quickly answer before we have to end our workshop.
I'll speak briefly to the one that asks about helping beginning athletes versus more experienced athletes, because I think, again, this is something that's really important and plays out quite a bit with student athletes. So often when we first start playing a sport, it's what's called intrinsically rewarding. We do it because it's fun. We do it because we like it. We do it because it makes us feel good. We do it because we're good at it. We do it because we want to get better at it. And inevitably, as we keep playing, we hit this point in our careers where we get quote unquote serious. And when we get serious, we tend to shift why we're doing what we're doing, right? A lot of people have asked about motivation. Our motivation changes. And rather than those really nice intrinsic motives, we switch to what's called an extrinsic motivational system. So, Hank, to put you on the spot for a sec, you're saying, I'm trying to get recruited, right? Like that's an example. Like, maybe you started off playing baseball because you liked it. Now, maybe part of why you're playing baseball is because I want to use it to help me go to college, right? It's that it becomes a means to an end. It becomes something that gives us something else that we want. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that's wrong. But a lot of the stress, a lot of the issues from a mental perspective and also from a performance perspective that athletes have is related to that switch. Because when we're intrinsically motivated, like we are early on, that's what tends to produce peak performance. And also what tends to make us feel our best as we're competing, what helps us enjoy it the most. When we're more extrinsically motivated, there's a lot more pressure there and a lot less joy to be had. And so I think more often than not, the people who present to people like myself, or I imagine to Kyle too, maybe he can speak to it if I'm wrong, are probably more experienced athletes who are now having trouble either feeling pleasure doing what they're doing, or they're so consumed by the pressure of it that they've kind of lost the thread. And so in so many ways, what we're trying to do is help them reconnect with, well, why did you like this to begin with, right? You've probably heard the expression, what's your why, right? That's one of the big motivational cliches that's out there. And help them figure out, like, what is your why? Are you playing baseball because you want a scholarship? Are you playing baseball because you like it? Because that's going to have very different implications. So Hank, I'm not trying to pick on you. I have no idea what your motivation is, but you kind of get what I'm saying, that it just changes over time. And it is, the people who become more experts at the sports, they're the ones who often have the issues that are required to deal with a sports psychologist.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll look at the latest question I saw about how do you kind of regulate emotions. I'm not sure if there was something that was missing there in terms of a coach who can be a certain way, but it kind of goes into like external factors, right? And that kind of just goes with a lot what we've been talking about this entire time is how do we deal with the uncontrollable things, right? And one of the first things I always do when I work with teams is, okay, bipolar pick favorites, is what are those things that you specifically are going to find yourself fixating on? What's your focus going to go to? Because like I said, you feel what you focus on. And if you're focusing on those things that you don't like, the things that kind of do get your emotions going in a way you don't want to be, it's more so how do we train ourselves to be able to not ignore it, because sometimes ignoring can honestly be one of those situations where you just leave a situation and then it just kind of festers until it explodes. But how do you kind of accept it and then understand, like, does this actually have any importance to me, right? When I'll just use the example of, a coach makes a comment about the way you perform, right? A lot of times we get very upset about that and we get very emotional, like, oh, he doesn't think I'm good, right? But when you listen, you can just hear, what did he actually say? Did he actually give me any advice that I can use to get better? Sometimes we might find some validity in what they said. And then sometimes you might just think, you know what, I don't know if that's something that's really useful. So taking the emotion, hearing what's being said is more so going to be, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Going back to that response, right? I can't control the way they act. I can't control the way they speak to me, but I can control the way that I'm going to move on from it. So in terms of like feedback, distractions outside of it, it's more so what is actually useful to me If it's useful, use it. If not, what is something that you would rather be focusing on that would be useful for you?
Thank you so much to both of our panelists for their insights today. We hope that future viewers will get the chance to experience the essence of the field and maybe even be inspired to pursue or learn more about the mental health side of student athletes. Mental health has always been a vital part of our daily lives and will continue to be for generations to come, especially in the athletics field. If you'd like to learn more about BranchOut and our future panels, please check us out at www.vailbranchout.org, like us on Facebook at Veritas Education Leaders, or follow our Instagram at BranchOutVeritas.
Thank you everyone for attending. Have a good night.